Good afternoon and welcome to this week's Blab. So this week we are talking about sourcing globally, international sourcing, and I've got my usual co-host Stephen.
Hello.
And two fabulous guests who are incredibly well informed about this subject. So I don't know if you'd like to introduce yourselves. Ladies first.
Right. My name is Kasia. I've been sourcing throughout my entire recruitment career. And I've had a chance to work on some international projects as part of that. So anything from, the UK, which I was always focusing on mainly, to Poland, Germany, even Dubai at some point. Mm-hmm. So hopefully some international experience to share with you guys.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And Mark?
Sure. Mark Lundgren. Originally Danish. I left 12 years ago, Denmark, and I've been living in Germany, Ireland, in the UK now. Worked across the European countries, pretty much most of them. Worked with India, working with an American company now, so sourcing globally. I've always sourced globally in my career, spanning 15 years.
Excellent. Stephen, what's your international recruitment experience?
He went to Jersey once.
I worked in the Isle of Man for a couple of summer seasons.
Oh, you did?
No, my international recruitment experience is, well, it's not zero. There was a time when I was recruiting oil engineers for Kazakhstan.
Oh, yeah.
And it was in a particular oil field where toxic fumes were literally seeping from the ground. And you could only be there for 2 weeks at a time before coming away for 2 weeks. There was officially on the salary package was danger money for the toxic gas that you were going to be inhaling. I've done bits and pieces, but I always wanted to recruit internationally and travel internationally and meet chief executives in the Bangkok Hilton or wherever, somewhere glamorous. And it always seemed to me that international recruitment was the glamorous side of the recruiting industry. Now, have I gotten that wrong? Is it much more mundane than that, or what can you tell me?
For me, it's probably much more desk based. I actually think I worked with a company in Norway that was supplying that oil field in Kazakhstan because they needed welders for titanium because it was so toxic. So that was 10 years ago. I think, a lot of it there's a lot of, especially in the exec side, but it's very glamorous. But a lot of it is desk research. It's about getting to talk to them. From a sourcing point of view, for us, we're kind of the first kind of point of contact, and we're the finders of the people. A lot of the times, the glamorous thing is the candidates themselves are flying halfway around the world to meet with senior executive, meet with people. But for us, it's less so. It's more of a research, email, LinkedIn, phone, talking to people at random time zones. Yeah.
So technology means these days that so much international recruitment can be done via screens like this. So really, the past 10, 15 years will have revolutionized recruitment and sourcing of candidates worldwide in a way that never could be done before because the tools just weren't there to do it other than the telephone.
Yeah, it makes my life easier as well. I don't have to be, just gives us more opportunities. I don't have to be in a specific country to work with a specific company. I worked with France at Christmas, but I was in Australia for Christmas. So I was talking to French salespeople sitting in an Airbnb apartment in Melbourne. They didn't know any better, and my company was like, well, if whatever you do, you can do it from where you are. So the technology has definitely helped.
It's changed so much that I started sourcing in the UK. So I've never really sourced a lot for the Polish market, and to be honest, it doesn't really. You don't even feel the difference between sourcing and sourcing internationally because it doesn't matter where you are. And even when you source within that same country, you're rarely going to source people who are all based in your location. So,
what would you say, both of you? What would you say are the biggest and most topical challenges today that any international recruiter has to be on top of and be aware of, that can either help to make recruitment happen smoothly or get in the way of that happening?
I would say, first of all, we often forget. I mean, English is definitely the international language of business. We can all work in English, and that's great. But a big challenge for recruiters, in my mind, is using other languages when sourcing as well, because you don't typically know how to source in German, for example, just because you're looking for someone who is based in Germany or speaks German, and that limits what we find. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it gets easier the higher up the level you're looking for. So senior executives, in most areas will be versed in English, but definitely, some countries it's very difficult. Even on a senior level, Germany is a very good example. I mean, it's one of the reasons I've had a really good career is that I lived in Germany. I speak German as a second language, and it's both when I came from sales and come to recruitment, that's going to make things easier, because when you reach out, most Germans understand English, but when you reach out in local language, no matter where it is, it's going to give you a better way in. I mean, I've seen that number of times, people that other people have tried to chase in English, and it's like they'll wait a bit maybe to answer or not answer at all, and it's going to fall down the kind of email chain, or no, I'll wait till later. If you do it in their own language, it just makes things easier. You're going to get a answer straight away, even if it's just a one-liner or a phone number, and it's like, let's talk later kind of thing. Same thing from sales. I started my career in kind of sales in Scandinavia for an Irish company, and it was very much that kind of thing. All Scandinavians speak English, but getting your foot in the door is difficult. Having a meeting in English is no problem, but getting that kind of first contact and that commitment to actually wanting to see somebody and do a demo, if that can be done in local language, it's just 10 times more effective.
So are you saying that whilst in theory you could speak with everyone in English, in practice it really helps to have additional languages? I mean, I only speak 2 languages, English and Glaswegian. So it seems to me that it would be impossible for me to and frankly, I wouldn't have the credibility with only having English when speaking to people from the rest of Europe, for example.
I wouldn't say.
I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Necessarily, because I mean, yeah, sure. Whenever I speak to anyone who's Polish, regardless of where they're based, I'm going to speak Polish to them, just because it's a little bit easier to get through the noise. But the thing is, what you want to show people is ultimately that you're doing a little bit of research. So even if it's just a greeting that's in their local language, I think that's fine. And going back to what Tris said in the chat, it's definitely more about culture, because even when you speak to Germans in English, you still have to remember about their culture and how they like to do things. And it's a more traditional culture, I would say, than some others. So that's kind of it. It's just understanding that the culture is different. So for example, in Germany, I mean, getting people to reply is super easy, because they're all very, very polite in that way that they're going to come back to you. And I've always had a response rate of over 80% in Germany. That's not the challenge there. The challenge there is getting people to reply with something other than, I'm perfectly happy, thank you very much. So every culture, every different market, it has different challenges, I'd say.
I mean, last month as well was a good example. Like I'm working on a project with the Middle East, and it's Ramadan, for a whole month. You're not going to expect to talk to people in what is their afternoon, because a lot of the times, they have, the days are shorter, they're not going to work. So anything, for that month of Ramadan is just going to make things a little bit easier. And then kind of last week with Eid and people taking most of the week off for holiday. And that's just something you need to look into. I had that before, working with Morocco, and the company I worked for had a lot of starters in Ramadan, and they couldn't understand why they didn't pass the test at the end of week 1 and 2. And I was like, they're exhausted. They haven't eaten all day. So it's small things that you just, a lot of the times, if you haven't lived there, you don't know. If you haven't you can speak the language, but actually going there and understanding it, is completely different.
And sometimes it can be a tiny thing. So, for example, I've seen this discussion come back again and again in some groups on Facebook about whether you should say, "I hope you're well" at the beginning of a call or email when you talk to people. Certainly not if they're Polish. There's nothing worse than you can try. And it's a tiny thing, and it's not even the language that they use or anything. It's just that one tiny thing you have to remember.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you can easily, and obviously stereotyping is often not such a good thing to do, but if you're culturally sensitive to the differences between people in different countries and how they would expect to be treated, then would you say that that's the same thing as being sensitive to the sectors that they're in? Because in different sectors or different levels of seniority of individuals, they would expect to be treated in different ways or approached in different ways.
I mean, it's very much so. And a lot of the times it's about asking, even if you know that, like, I don't know this, you would do the same if you go into a new industry. Just find somebody either who you work with or somebody that you talk to. And it's like, how am I doing it right? What would I do to get to speak to people in your industry? And it's the same thing with countries. When you go into a country, just find out. It's like, okay, is there a specific way I can do this? Not always listen to them, because a lot of, especially people who are local, and it's like, no, this is the way we do things. This is the way we always do things. Is not always true. It's like, well, let's try it differently and see if that works. As long as you don't kind of cross some boundaries that they don't want to. But when I started working with India, it was a lot around, we can't do this, we can't do that, and this is how we normally do it. It's like, well, let's try to switch that up a bit and see if we can do things, better.
What would be the dangerous things that you could make assumptions on that, frankly, you should know better about? Someone with a bit of informed insight in recruiting in particular countries, what are the common mistakes to make?
Well, some of the countries like Poland, Germany, where everything is very formal. So even if you speak the language, but you start talking to them informally, like English, just have one. You say you to everybody, but with Poland and with Germany, you would, if you don't know people personally, you would be very formal, and that changes the whole, both your written and your spoken language. So just kind of knowing that, and like I've seen people who speak German, but they've never gotten that subtlety of everybody's own last name. So they just wade into it, and especially from a recruiter point of view, that you're just going to burn a lot of bridges, because they're used to that, and that's the culture of the country. Later you can get away with a lot more if you kind of know people, but knowing that.
What would you say, Kasia?
I would have to agree. I think sorry, lost my train of thought there.
That's it.
Sorry, let's Stephen, do me a favor, repeat the question.
I think Jim had a question around whether some call.
I'm all there.
Well, an example would be when recruiting people from the Far East, and say particularly Japan. In Japanese culture and Japanese business, they really don't like to speak business up front. They need to get to know someone, because their culture is very much predicated on personal relationships. So before you can even bring up business, you need to get to know someone. And even though the two people or everyone in the conversation knows that's what they're doing, you still have to respect the process. So you need to you introduce yourself to someone personally, you let them know a bit about yourself, you ask about them in a professional manner, and you have to allow a certain amount of time to go past. So you couldn't possibly make a sales call to someone in Japan and be doing business on the same call. It would have to be one or two or several calls down the line before you do that. And in recruitment, it would be the same, and that can slow the process down. So you have to respect the cultural norms, unless the person on the other side says, well, look, I tell you what, let's cut to the chase, let's move things along quicker than expected. So in Japanese culture, you would defer to what's normal unless they prompted you to do otherwise. So, Kasia, what would your experience be of that sort of thing with particular countries, whether it's Germany or France or Southern Europe compared to Northern Europe?
Yeah, sure. So to be honest, I think in terms of time and building relationships, it took the longest in Germany. And I would have to get people on the phone because they're really, really polite in writing. But unless we had that chance to speak on the phone, it wouldn't really go anywhere. But it is different I think, especially now, because the way we communicate, the cultures we are immersed in change so quickly. Like, I would say I'm perfectly fine doing things the way you would do in the UK, but even though I'm Polish, right? So my culture doesn't ultimately determine how to do things. And I think when we talk about recruitment internationally, there's a big difference, just like when you do that in just one country, between marketing and sourcing. So basically, if you're trying to get to a larger number of people, sure, it's important to take the cultural differences into account and incorporate them in your recruiting strategy. When you're dealing with individuals, so when you're sourcing, it doesn't really matter, because yes, that's a good point of entry, sort of to give yourself a bunch of assumptions you're going to be testing throughout the interaction and the recruitment process, but ultimately it's the individual. So it doesn't really matter whether they're British or Polish or German. It shouldn't.
Can I ask, Kasia, do you have experience where you have individuals being sourced from a particular country to somewhere? So say you were sourcing someone from Poland for a company in the States, and what you were having to do was train to an extent or prepare the candidate for what to expect from the interviewer, and perhaps even prep the interviewer to be more sensitive to the cultural norms of the candidate. Is that something that you would have experience of?
Yeah, but and it wouldn't necessarily always have to do with the nationality. I think that's the important part and the interesting part. You said it's similar to candidates at different levels of seniority and different industries. If you have someone from banking coming in for an interview with a startup in fintech, it's certainly a very different environment, and you want to prepare people for what they can expect. And it's not just about their nationality. So I think whenever you're actually in a recruitment process with individuals, what you're really going to look at is their individual experience, the places they've been, what they could have possibly experienced. So people who've worked in international teams in the past are more likely to understand certain differences themselves, and with others, you prepare them a little bit. And I remember actually, it's not even a recruitment, it's not even part of what was a recruitment process, but more working with people in Manila. So Alexander Mann Solutions, where I started work in recruitment, they had a center in Manila that was rather new. And I remember the challenges of actually communicating with recruiters that we would work with internationally. Because it's a very different culture. And people would say, for example, they would say, I'm going to get this done by tomorrow. Not because they knew realistically they could get things done by tomorrow, but because they were trying to express respect rather than anything else, rather than realistic timeframes. So we I think, and this is what I can't understand, because we talk about culture in business and in managing companies, but we rarely learn from that as recruiters. And it's the same thing, really. There's no difference.
Mark, can I ask, what's your experience on the offer stage, where when a candidate is offered a job, the process of offer, negotiation, acceptance, start dates, how can that be a real problem in international sourcing, where you have different levels of expectations or different ways of negotiation, where someone can either feel insulted or offended in some way, or when an employer really wants to treat them well, how can that throw up problems for a recruiter?
I mean, offers in general can come in different, with different what they expect. countries like Belgium, where 70% of the car fleet is company cars, whether people drive for work or not. Working with India, where the makeup of their salaries is very difficult. You basically need a higher degree in payroll to work that out. I worked with Morocco, where they only talk net monthly salary, which can be very difficult to kind of get your head around. What are we actually talking? Because everybody has a different, tax base. And just getting around notice periods being anything, Germany, Norway with 3 months. That's all kind of something. I think it all comes back to how you source and how you talk to people. So rather than coming to somebody and saying, this is what I have, this is what the company has, switching it on the other side and saying, when I talk to people, I don't necessarily tell them what I'm looking for. I ask them what they would want to do, what their next step would be, what the ideal next role is. If I have something that's similar to that, fine. If not, then I might have something in the future. And asking them, rather than, what's your salary? What's your salary expectation? Or what would I need to pay you to make you move away from where you are now? A lot of the people I'm talking to do not necessarily want to move anywhere. But it's up for us, I think, other than just finding the people to contact, for us as sourcers now, is just around finding out how do we get to talk to people around what their hot buttons is. What's the thing that's going to make them move? And that's different for everybody. Somebody might have a long commute. If you have something that's closer, that's their hot button. Money isn't always the issue, but it could be all kinds of things: size of company, the country. Looking at expats who wants to go home or want to go closer to where they come from, and things like that. That's the job for us, to find out what's going to make this person move at all. And then what's going to make them move to our company or whoever we're working with at that point.
Can I ask both of you? Sorry, did you want to chip in, Louise?
Yeah. Can I ask? There's a quick question in the sidebar I was going to mention, which was Jonathan asking whether either of you have any experience of recruiting into Iran and Dubai.
Dubai, yes. Iran, not so much. Dubai, Iran, I haven't. I have people in my network who've worked with Iran and startups. But it's really early days there. Dubai is a bit easier because 99% of the people living there are expats anyway, and it's very much kind of it's easier to get people there. There's a lot of people already there. They're very willing to talk to us because they're always looking for something better. Because most of them are been a couple of years with a company. The tax is good if they're in a free trade zone. There's another thing, when you come to salary. So a country like Dubai, where landlords would normally require a year up front in terms of rent. So if the company doesn't give a housing allowance, most people won't take the job, because who has 1 year of money to put into a house that you're going to live in for the next year? But yeah, it's easier to Dubai. Iran, I don't have a lot of experience with, and I would expect it be a lot harder.
Yeah.
I was going to ask another question, actually, if that's okay, which was, if that's okay with you, Stephen, which was around, and you touched on it at the start, around the use of technology. And obviously there is more and more technology, video conferencing, for example, and things like this. But is there specific technology which you use all the time? And is there some tools which you use more for some countries than other? And actually, Martin's just said here, do you use things like Facebook or email or WhatsApp for different countries in which you're recruiting? So I wonder whether you could both give me an answer to that.
It depends. I mean, it depends what's kind of, again, it depends on the candidate, both in terms of what's their age, what's their industry. Some industries, it's hard to find them in general. And you might be the phone is the only way you can actually reach them. Some other ones is, they're all over social media and using whatever that is. If that's Twitter, WhatsApp, to get them there, that might be that. And some, I had India, where they're very good on email. Phone is only when they're outside of working hours, because they generally don't want to take a call to working hours. They don't have a problem with talking and talking at different, very late in their evening to accommodate European kind of people. But there's always a lot of technology, but I think it comes back to whatever is the most effective, and just asking what's the best way to reach you. Skype have been a really good friend of mine in the past, of just because a lot of people have that. There's a lot of new kind of things coming up, but it's about finding something that most people have and are comfortable with.
I would say also it's it's great to find out what most people use, but you also want to know what's specific to that one industry that you're currently recruiting in. So for example, phone doesn't necessarily work. It's not the best sourcing tool I've ever used in general, but when sourcing for investment banking, that was pretty much the number one thing, because usually when you work in investment banking, you don't really use your phone during work hours, and people don't really, the social networks are blocked mostly, even LinkedIn in a lot of cases. So you're just not going to get people otherwise, and you want to use the phone. I would say also, like, try to find the local things. So for example, using Zing for the German market. And by the way, right now, apparently, if you have 7 invitations accepted, you can get free a month.
They've had that for a number of years, yeah. I mean, Zing has always linked. More and more Germans are coming on LinkedIn, but Zing for Germans is pretty much it. And you have your different networks in Poland, Golden Line.
Golden Line has twice the number of users that LinkedIn has.
NASA Klasse, if you really want to get personal.
Yeah. Well, that isn't really popular in the cities. So that's the thing. If you really want to, know the details, the best thing you can do is just get in touch with someone who's more familiar with that particular market and actually ask people. And a good way to do that is, for example, there's a social network for expats called Internations.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've used that for a while just to find people who have a similar cultural background to mine, but live in the place that I'm interested in, because they are surprised by the same things I'm going to be surprised by, and so when I'm learning from them, they have, all of the answers to the questions I would have, and not someone else.
Can I ask? We're all Europeans here.
Well,
so a topical question. You guys are recruiting and traveling and speaking with candidates all over Europe. Do you detect any change in tone or ambition of people to recruit throughout Europe or to move to work in other places in Europe on account of not only the Brexit vote in the UK, but movements within different countries within Europe, where some countries people want to stay well away from and others are a magnet? So, for example, are people being drawn more towards Germany or to Scandinavian countries, or less so to the UK? What do you detect in terms of the pool of the marketplace right now?
So since the Brexit, I lived in Ireland for 3.5 years, and I still have a lot of friends there. I see a lot more people. The problem with Germany and Scandinavia is if you don't speak the language, it's gonna be harder. I lived with my Polish wife in Denmark for 2.5 years, and it's difficult for her without speaking Danish.
Yeah.
So there's only going to be a very small handful of companies where you can actually get work without speaking local language. So the UK and Ireland are always going to be kind of top of mind for most people. UK have fallen now because of people don't know what's going to happen. There's an insecurity, both from a candidate point of view, but also from companies kind of saying, right, London is good, but could we make Dublin just as good for that? From a long-term perspective, if we hire this person in Dublin rather than London, it's gonna, short term, it's probably gonna cost us less. Long term, we know it's gonna be EU. So, and I've seen all over social media as well, kind of having expats saying either they're moving back to their home countries in Europe, or saying UK is not attractive at the moment until we kind of know what's gonna happen. And I think that's gonna continue until we know for sure what the plan is gonna be, and whether I'm gonna be allowed to stay in the UK.
Yeah. Kasia, what about you? Hello, Kasia?
Can hear you.
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
No one to repeat.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. I'm having some issues, but the interesting thing is that you see recruiters trying to use this, and it's definitely used in very emotion-driven marketing. So basically,
oh, I think we're having problems.
I don't know if you can
connection,
still hear
Kasia.
me right now.
Do you want to? We lost you.
Let me get out and get back to you.
It's like having a Dalek on.
Yeah.
Exterminate.
Because I suppose what I was getting at was that, yes, some countries could be much more appealing than they were maybe 2 months ago. And I do wonder about the Scandinavian countries where so many people speak English. So for people in the UK, who are inclined to work abroad and they're used to, frankly, colder weather. The Scandinavian countries, to what extent is there now more of a pool there than before?
Oil and gas has always predominantly been, you had Scottish, you had English people working in oil and gas. Like whether you were Stavanger or Bergen or Aberdeen didn't really matter much. When I did a telecom, project managers, engineers, kind of high level people, no problem. The problem is the kind of normal office jobs, and when it's in either local or smaller on a global kind of scale companies in Scandinavia, of actually you can get a job, but it's you kind of assimilating into the culture and living there. My wife was happy enough, was lucky enough to get a job with Microsoft where it didn't matter she didn't speak Danish because the whole company were expats and her boss was an American. But when she finished there, it was very much, companies were like, well, yes, our business language is English, but what if somebody calls who is a customer who speaks Danish? You would need to be able to see that. And you have that tendency in Scandinavia a lot. So there's definitely opportunities there, but you're not going to see the mass influx into Scandinavian countries. A lot of Polish people went to Scandinavian countries when the EU opened up as well. But a lot of them moved again because they found out, it's very difficult. It's difficult countries to work in, to assimilate, and cost of living is high, tax is high, so you need to get to a pretty good level to to kind of make it worthwhile to be away from your family.
Is there a difference when you get to Southern Europe, such as Spain, Italy, Greece, where people? I know that the unemployment levels are considerably higher, but are there pools on people from there, or are people flowing from those countries?
There's a lot of want of flowing out. I think, especially some of the specialist and senior level people that I talk to, you would always have. They would generally, there's a small part of the population normally who would want to leave. And it's not Ireland in 150 years ago where everybody was trying to leave. You always have a small part of your population who actually wants to leave the country. So most of the people we actually want to talk to, they have good jobs and they're perfectly happy staying. And if they have a good job, they're going to stay there. Yes, you have Spain and Italy, Greece, with youth unemployment being really high. So it's a lot of the times the people with less experience who are very open to going abroad, but that's not necessarily the people that we want to talk to.
Okay.
I would say also it kind of depends, because the problem when you're sourcing is that you'll get a lot of people who are happy to have a conversation, but they won't actually move. I mean, they may consider moving, they may think that they would be happy to move, but then they don't really start. I mean, I've been in that situation, so you don't really start checking out the technical details of moving somewhere else until very late in the process. So I would say one of the biggest challenges is to get people interested in what you have to offer, but at the same time, you have to keep challenging them about whether they would move at all. And you have to make them do their homework. If you do everything for them, then it doesn't feel as real. But you have to have them, research the location, research how they would go about finding an apartment, and, registering with a doctor. It's tiny details like that people don't really like to think about until they.
And it's a family thing. So, I mean, we sometimes seem to forget that, yes, we're talking to one person about one job, but it's more than that, just that one person. Might be they have a husband, a wife, they have kids, and it takes a lot. I've done it 6 times in the last kind of 10 years. I'm happy to have a wife that actually is exactly like me and likes doing that. I now have a small daughter, but that doesn't mean that, that everything is closed and we're going to stay here forever and ever. It just, we know now what it takes. It gives me credibility when I talk to people about relocation because I've done it. I know what it takes, and I know the headaches you can get. You can talk to my wife about the months that she spent sorting everything out for Germany, because it's a lot more bureaucratic than any other country we've been in, and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely, get in early, and if it is a job where that this is Dubai, or I want you to move to the UK, and it's a big thing, then get that early and saying, look, these are some sites you should look into. Have a talk to your partner. With your kids, we're going to support this and that, but you need to think about it. And I've had a lot of people who said, look, this is something we would love to do, but I have a son who's 6, just started school, or we're not going to do anything until they start high school, things like that. And that's just, you need to, that's even across, even from one part of the country to somewhere else, trying to get somebody from Edinburgh down to London or the other way, it's going to be the same thing. It's not really across borders only.
No.
Well, it is across border, but the whole kind of global relocation.
No, and I think relocation is an issue full stop, isn't it? It's just that if you're relocating to another country, speaking to someone who has an understanding of how that's going to feel is probably going to help. Again, it's another thing which is a challenge you can help them overcome with your own personal knowledge. We are 35 minutes in. We normally do 30-minute blabs. Can I ask you both to give us one final thought? So either a challenge you think that sources need to be aware of, or a tip, or a website, or an app that you use, which you think that other sources and recruiters might find useful to know.
Well, I can do one. So this is something I started very early in my career. If you're starting a new country, there's a book series called Xenophobe's Guide to.
Right.
It takes a bit of a piss on the local culture, whatever it is. If you read it for your own country and your own kind of nationality, you can see a lot of things that you're just like, I didn't think of that, but it's actually true. It just gives you a lot of the kind of idiosyncrasies of that country. I know there's one for the Danish, and I read that with my team back, 10, 15 years ago. I was in a team with a Slovak, 2 Australians, and 2 Danish, and we read that book together and kind of like, we didn't think about that from a Danish point of view. So I've tried to do that for the different kind of countries that I work with, because it gives you a lot of those kind of cultural things that you wouldn't think of unless you're in it.
So it's like chatting with a local, isn't it? It's giving you...
It is. It is things that even locals wouldn't have thought of, but if you don't know it, you might step in something.
That's a brilliant idea. I love that. And you, Kasia?
I would have to say Internations. It's kind of like, I like the resource because ultimately I learned better in a conversation with people. So I would either use Meetup, or I would use Internations to find people who have been through a relocation to a particular location, or again, Poles living in, I don't know, the UK or elsewhere, if I want people to relocate, because it's just easier to find people who do have that experience. And by the way, Internations, interestingly, I haven't really met a lot of recruiters who would use it, except for one recruiter who worked in an agency that would regularly supply us with candidates. And so this is how I got interested in it, because no one would ever use it. And we kept actually going through an agency to, pay for candidates that we could have easily sourced.
Is that the link I've just shared? Internations.org.
Yes, that's it. And it's very cheap if you want to pay for being able to message people. Otherwise, you can just, use it just for your initial research, and it works quite well.
Yes, brilliant. Okay, thank you so much, both of you. Fabulous work there, Stephen, on guiding that conversation. And what I'll do after this is I'll save these links into a blog post with this blab and some of the other content I found before we spoke. But thank you both very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.